It's Gotham here from OneShot. Thanks for joining us here today. Everyone's really looking forward to kind of understanding a bit about your journey from a recruiter into the SDR world at Threat Connect all the way through to Terminus. Be great for a quick introduction, a bit about yourself, and yeah, looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. So Alex Harris, currently an account executive at Terminus, an account-based marketing software platform based out in Atlanta, Georgia, but currently myself based here in London, as you may be able to tell from the accent, if for any American listeners. So yeah, my background is, so I studied at university in Nottingham-Trent, international relations, then sort of joined an SDR role at Threat Connect, where I was then promoted into an AE role, and then very recently, after only 2 weeks in, but moved and joined Terminus, which is really exciting. And yeah, that's a bit about me.
Brilliant. Yeah, nice one, Alex. Yeah, it'd be interesting to, like, I guess, go through that journey a bit in terms of you finished university, college, you then went into a recruiting role before kind of moving to Threat Connect as one of their kind of like first BDR, SDR roles. I guess just going right back, you finish in college, you're an AE now, so going right back to like you finished in uni. Mm-hmm. What made you were you just looking for a job and thought you were going into recruitment? How did that kind of transition happen?
Yeah, so I think it actually starts just before I finished university. So I did a placement year. For those perhaps haven't come across placement years, is a year between your second year and final year of university. And I was not supposed to do a placement year because my course was a 3-year course, but all my housemates were doing business courses where they had sandwich years where they were going and doing an industrial placement year to gain some experience. And I thought, well, why would I not gain some invaluable experience in between my university degree to A, understand what I might want to do after university, and B, gain some skills that may help me post-university to gain some employment. So I spent a year in graduate recruitment at a company called Instant Impact. Probably one of the most transformational years in my career so far. And reasons for that are, well, firstly, it was graduate recruitment. So everyone knows that people cut their teeth on recruitment and gain some pretty good all-round skills from a year in recruitment. And secondly, it was graduate recruitment. So it gave me a really good insight in terms of what was going to be out there for me post-university. Obviously, I'd do a year in recruitment and then go back to do my final year in university and then graduate and hopefully find some employment after university. So I think it taught me a lot. Recruitment teaches you a lot. I think for anyone that has done recruitment will definitely agree. I think that's where I really understood that post-university I wanted to work in sales and really the SDR, BDR world within tech. Because I spent 9 months of my time there working on BDR entry-level sales roles, placing people into really exciting tech companies, and saw them really sort of rocket ship their careers in their first year or so, getting promoted into AE roles. And that's kind of where I realized that, okay, that's what I want to do after university. And then went back to university. And unfortunately, midway through my final year, COVID hit, which was obviously an interesting time for everyone. Finished my final year remotely. But after finishing my sort of degree, within about 2 weeks of, luckily, because I knew exactly what I wanted, within 2 weeks of finishing, despite COVID, I'd secured my first role at Threat Connect as a BDR. And Threat Connect was based in Arlington, Virginia, but we're coming over to the EMEA region to really try and scale their operations over here. Joined as a first SDR. They had a couple of SDRs in the States, but they were kind of feasting on a lot of inbound interest because we had a big brand, big awareness in the States for who we were and our type of technology. And then came and looked to scale the BDR function from scratch out to what it was now.
And like, so that's like, so you kind of, it was quite lucky for you because you had that placement year, because a lot of people obviously finish university and they don't have any idea, right? It's kind of like loads of debt, like student loans, need to get a job, need to move out. So people look around to end up in a sales role. So you kind of already had that placement year, so you already had a good idea before that. Did you have an idea of what graduate recruitment would be like before, like, starting it? Like, in terms of, is it like, were you doing like 20 cold calls a day, 50 cold calls a day, sending loads of emails? Did you have that expectation, and what was it actually like, day to day, especially that first kind of month?
Yeah, I mean, I had a little bit of an expectation around what recruitment was because I had a family member that had done some recruitment in the past. And I was somewhat aware, but perhaps a little bit blissfully unaware, because as a student, you're kind of not 100% sure on what you're getting yourself into. But I did know that I was pretty target driven, I was pretty motivated, and often thrived in situations where I was dealing with people like speaking to people and just having conversations and understanding situations. So initially I was probably not shocked, but maybe the sort of initial onboarding phase was quite tough, perhaps, because it was, okay, these are your targets. If you don't hit your targets, we're going to have serious conversations, and find out what's going wrong and why things aren't working. In terms of KPIs, it wasn't necessarily so much focused on number of dials. It was always, and I think thankful for the founders of the business to being output focused. They were more focused on what's the output, what's the goal we're trying to achieve here. It doesn't really matter how you get there. You may make 100 calls in a day, you may send 100 emails a day, but if you're not getting to the goal, something's clearly not working. So we need to try and unpack what's really the kind of key to success there. So working back from initially when I first started, it was a number of CVs that were sent to clients in a week, basically. And working back from that, understanding how many conversations I may need to have, how many positive conversations I need to have, and then ultimately then from that, we could work out the conversion rate from dials to conversations to positive conversations, and then CVs sent to clients. That was the approach we took initially.
That's brilliant. Yeah, because I think a lot of people, yeah, it's funny you mentioned like the onboarding was kind of like you're straight in there. If you look at a lot of like, especially tech companies now, they're pushing out their great onboardings. People are flying all over the place. They get their welcome kits and like free goodies and brand new laptops and all the rest of it. And I guess you probably didn't have any of that. It was like, here's your desk. But I think more importantly, I think on the metric side of things, that's a really important lesson. So it's kind of like the number of dials, number of emails, all those things are kind of irrelevant unless you kind of know what your output is, what you're trying to achieve. So I think having that grounding and working backwards to say, okay, well, number of CVs equals this many conversations, because that applies everywhere. So I'm assuming you took all of that learning when you went into Threat Connect. You already had that kind of, okay, well, what's my target? How do I hit that target? What are the numbers? You know, people take a few years sometimes to learn that. So to kind of get that schooling from week one, day one, it's just really advantageous for you.
Yeah, I think it certainly helped me put things into perspective, because you do often, and there are organizations that do still preach the make 100 dials a day, send 100 emails a day, and you'll get to your target no matter what, which in some scenarios, like it may work. And there are certain scenarios where you do need to have high levels of activity. And I think certainly in those first 3 to 6 months where you're still working out what good looks like and how to have a conversation, how to ask the right questions, what you even want to say when you open up a cold call. And activity upfront is helpful, but then you need to start becoming more sort of detail orientated around, okay, well, yes, if I make 60 calls in a day, how many of those are actually ending up in a conversation with the decision maker or the whoever the person you want to be targeting and not the gatekeeper may be. Yeah, okay, you may have 6 or 7 conversations in a day, but only one of them is actually a positive conversation, and only one of them, or 1 in 3 of them, may actually lead to a meeting. That's when you start to realize, and you can kind of get to an operating rhythm of what the number of calls you need to be making, because it's really initially, it may be a finger in the air. If you've got no one there before you to kind of take a measurement on how many calls they're making and how many meetings they're booking from those calls, it's difficult to make that judgment. So we initially just said we'll hit around the 50-60 mark to just make or take a temperature check. And there were days where we did more, and then we started to, once we had some data to analyze, working backwards and looking, okay, well, for every meeting we book, we make this many dials and this many conversations, and then this many conversations of those are positive, and that gives you the inputs that you need to put in. Yeah. And as time goes on, you become more and more efficient and you become better at your trade. You can obviously reduce the numbers because you know that how many calls you're going to make, that's how many conversations you're going to have, and that's how many meetings you're going to book. So yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it kind of removes the huge amount of like pressure and kind of anxiety and stress that you might get from a sales role, because yeah, I think a lot of people will be like, I've got to hit 50 meetings or whatever, 10 meetings a month. That can be very daunting, and people can run into that like, hey, I need to just be busy, make 50 calls, 100 calls. But having those kind of baseline metrics gives you that daily cadence as well. Cool. And so kind of moving on a bit now in that journey. So Threat Connect, you're joining Threat Connect, you've kind of finished uni, you've had a really strong idea around what you want to do. You've had that kind of like year, 9-10 months experience, whatever it was. What made you join Threat Connect? Were you like, I think you were one of the first, if not the first BDR there, joining that team. How did you find that? And what did you learn during that process?
Yeah, so I think I learned a lot, firstly. That there's no doubt about how much I learned. It was a crazy amount, and obviously I'm very, very thankful for like how much I learned and how much I could take away from that in terms of future experience. So if we look at the first part of the question, why did I join Threat Connect? I think there's a few things that went into my decision-making process, and I think I set some criteria out for myself as to what I was looking for in an organization. Because there's so much noise around, and like if you look at how many SDR roles are currently live in the UK, it's nuts. The market is crazy at the moment. So certainly for anyone that's looking, set yourself some really clear decision criteria around what you want, because you'll often find that there's a lot of companies that, yeah, they may be a good fit, but they're not exactly what you're looking for, and you may end up finding yourself in the wrong role. So what I was looking for was an organization that was solving a genuine problem. Because sometimes there is, and there are lots of nice to have technologies out in the market at the moment. And if you're not solving a genuine problem for your prospects, it makes it a little bit more difficult to solve that problem and make it a big enough problem for organizations to actually do something about it. And the second thing was around a technology space that was going to be exciting and made me feel passionate or excited about it. And cybersecurity was certainly an area that was interesting. I knew there was longevity in that space, and it's certainly something that's not going to go away anytime soon, because organizations are only going to have to care about it more and more as time goes on. And then I had this thing in my mind that I wanted to be the first SDR on the ground in EMEA. So Threat Connect had a team in the States, predominantly working on inbounds, as we, as an organization based in the States, had a good presence over there, a good brand, lots of organizations looking at our types of technology. And I wanted to be the first just for a few reasons, I think. Number one was being able to sort of say that I had been the first and I'd developed a structure from scratch, or a team from scratch. And the second one was to use that as a way of then looking longer term in my career, where I want to go and be a chief revenue officer or leading revenue team for a fast growth SaaS business. It's almost having that experience of being the first somewhere else in perhaps a less junior position, but it gives you good experience of what it takes to build a team from scratch, and then obviously take that forward into my further career when I do get to that stage in my career. In terms of my learnings, I think there's a lot. I think there's a few things I'll always look back on and sort of try and focus on, really. So number one would be continuous like self-reflection, and continuously looking back at like what you've done, how you got there, and understand when things aren't working, what could you do differently to change things. And even when things are working, being one step ahead of that and going, okay, it's working now, but perhaps in 3 months' time it might not be working. So how can we try and change things? The second one would be problem focused. So often you hear people being really feature function sort of focused, and just essentially pitching their products and not really pitching the problems you solve. And that's what we really focused on as a team, being very problem orientated around how we helped organizations, instead of just going, yeah, we've got this button, that button, it does this, this and that. And actually being much more high level in terms of, hey, here's the problem you probably are facing, because we speak to people like yourself in this role. Typically, they highlight these are the problems. And using that throughout all of our conversations really helped us to uncover pain and demonstrate the ability to help organizations.
Yeah. Nice.
I think the last one would be consistency as well. Just being consistent in everything you do, because that just leads to results. And that's probably my last sort of learning, really.
Yeah, no, there's some interesting points. I think, like, I guess going back to one of the first points around why you picked Threat Connect, I find that interesting, where you were, I guess it was part of you, which is like, you're thinking like, okay, what is that sales journey? You know, coming from an SDR, maybe going to an SDR leader, AE, to enterprise AE, to sales manager, director, VP. So yeah, I completely agree. Right? If you can get at any point in your career, even if it's year 1, year 2 of your career, if you can get that kind of structure, what does it take to build something from scratch? What are the potential challenges there? I like another point you mentioned, where there's like a ton of jobs out there at the moment for like SDRs. Every company has got like shitload of funding, loads of positions open, and everyone's hiring SDRs. So there's a lot out there. So it's not necessarily like, okay, this company's offered me a great package. Is this the right company? Where for you pick this, there's a potential leadership role, there's a growth opportunity, there's no structure in place. Where, you know, the opposite of that is you could join a large company where they've already got a team of 20 BDRs, where it's a very different role, very structured, very process orientated. I just want to touch on one of the points you mentioned around, I guess, self-reflection or continuous learning, I guess. It's easy in sales where we have a good quarter, a good month, we have a few good months, we get complacent. How do you avoid that, right? If you've hit number 2-3 months in a row, a bad month or a bad quarter is always just around the corner in sales, unfortunately. Is there any things that you do on a kind of monthly basis or weekly basis or daily basis, whatever, that keep you aligned to like pushing yourself forward effectively?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that I certainly do, but also anyone can be doing to like try and understand. So I think, yeah, self-reflection is always good. Understanding when you do close a deal and why you closed it, what went well, what didn't go so well, but still managed to close the deal despite things not going well. And then when things do go wrong is really like going into the detail, understanding why it went wrong, what led up to that position, that point in time where things did go wrong, and really understanding how you could do things differently in the future to really make sure that that doesn't happen again. I think the biggest one for me is listening to calls. Lucky to have very, very strong call recording technology that just enables me to go and listen to calls, not just my own calls, but also my teammates' calls and colleagues' calls, to really understand the DNA of a really good deal, a good call, whatever it might be, to keep you on the ball, keep you sharp. And I think doing the basics well is another one. In terms of avoiding a bad quarter, or as you say, that there's always you're always just around the corner from a potential bad quarter, a bad week, or a bad month. Doing the basics well and knowing what basics you need to do well to make sure that you stay on track. I think certainly in the AE role now, I definitely, and everyone always says it, is when you move from an SDR role to an AE role, the whole don't stop prospecting is definitely true. And things like that would also always keep your pipeline topped up and making sure that you're not going to, especially in an AE role, not let yourself fall behind from a pipeline perspective or opportunities created and closed one. So those are probably some of the things I'd look back on.
Yeah, for sure. I think those are all like key points. I love the listening to calls. I think like looking back, like if I look at my sales career, it was trying to tag along to as many meetings as possible, listening to as many calls as possible. It's probably like, it's better than any kind of enablement course or training that you can ever do, is listening to other people's calls, especially if you've got a strong AE team above you, and that you're setting up those meetings and you just sit on it for 30 minutes, or you can listen to it if something's been recorded. You can role play that, listen to why they've asked that question, why they're responding in that way. Yeah, I think that for me is like the biggest winner. Cool. Coming on to like, I guess a topic that's quite close to your heart is the communities. I guess, what is you involved in SDR Nation? For I guess anyone who's listening who hasn't heard of that, it'll be good to understand that. What is SDR Nation? Why do people join? Why did you join? Where do you see the value? Because I think, in this pandemic world we're hopefully coming out of, people were just left remote. They didn't have an office where they could sit with other SDRs and AEs. So it was very much left to like remote community learning. So it'd be good to get, I guess the question is like, what is SDR Nation? Why did you get involved? What's your kind of opinion on communities in general?
Yeah, so I guess just from a like community perspective and what community I was involved. So obviously SDR Nation was one I joined when I first started as an SDR. I was also part of SDRs of London, which is a London-focused community for SDRs, and now part of AEs of London, and that's all run by Wiser, which is some really good community they've managed to build up there. They've also got others for other areas as well. So SDR Nation was founded by Michael Gagalino and Charlie Locke, two US sales directors or sales leaders. Effectively, it was all focused on helping SDRs, give them the tools to be successful, because they recognize that there's a gap in the market where SDRs are unfortunately not always given the coaching and the mentorship and guidance they need to be successful in their roles. And that is ultimately not fair sometimes, I think, but also SDRs need a lot of coaching and development focus, because often it may be their first role out of university or college, and they may be a little bit unaware of even navigating just the commercial sort of environment. So I joined because I joined as the first SDR, as I mentioned before, at Threat Connect. I joined with 3 senior AEs and a VP of sales, all who had come from sort of the non-tech space. I'd come from security consulting and big sort of large organizations where the concept of an SDR wasn't really a thing. And despite them knowing cybersecurity and sales very, very well, the whole cold calling, cold emailing, LinkedIn prospecting wasn't necessarily a concept they'd come across all that often. So I needed some mentorship, and I went external to try and find that mentorship to really understand what it took to be successful. I think my experience in graduate recruitment, placing BDRs and SDRs, helped me understand a little bit of what the sort of successful DNA might look like. And also following lots of content on LinkedIn or leaders on LinkedIn, and reading a fair amount of content, both blogs and books, to really understand what that looked like. I needed some more actionable tips that could be from either AEs, SDR managers, sales leaders who had been there and done it. And SDR Nation's focus was really on a number of different, I guess, areas that could help SDRs. So whether that be cold call coaching, email coaching, LinkedIn coaching, personal branding, things like just general career coaching, getting promoted, navigating the business, and a whole number of other areas that were basically coaches aligned to those specific areas, where they would have roundtable events, one-to-one meetings, just helping individuals navigate their way through those first 3, 6, 9, or 12 months as an SDR, to then get to wherever they wanted to be, whether that person wanted to get promoted into marketing or customer success or an AE, SDR management. Help them, give them the tools to be successful and really learn how to nail their role to be the best they could be.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think these communities didn't exist like 5 years ago, even 4 years ago, they probably didn't even exist. I think they were starting out. So the fact that you've got somewhere that you can like ask questions to, get experience from others, things about how do I get promoted? What's the amount of time it takes to go from an SDR to an AE? Like how many is the right amount of meetings, right? So those types of things, I think, every company will say you can ask them and it's an open forum, but there's certain questions that are you don't want to ask your employer, you don't want to ask your boss. So those communities are great. I guess just a few more questions here on the kind of influencer community on LinkedIn, and we've mentioned there's experienced sales leaders. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of people with a lot of opinions. People who've got great opinions who are highly experienced. People who've got great opinions who might have no experience. Like, how do you coming into this role, being a part of the communities, how do you decipher from like great advice to really poor advice? Because people read the wrong pieces of advice from the wrong people. It can be like quite bad for their career. How do you kind of look at that and make sense of it? There's so much out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there is a lot of noise, and there's a lot of people that would see themselves as a thought leader in a specific area that they post about regularly. My biggest piece of advice would probably be just take everything with a pinch of salt, and don't take everything as gold or as whatever you want to say. But I think there is lots of good content, and there is lots of information that is very, very valuable and can certainly help a lot of people. But there's also some content that simply won't apply to necessarily your sector, your industry, because there may be content that's focused on selling to sales and marketing individuals, or there's maybe content that's focused on selling to cybersecurity individuals. It's all very relative, and there's no silver bullet. Like, anyone could tell you that this is the perfect template for an email, or this is the perfect cold call script. Yes, it might be perfect for them. It might work for their personality, their style, but it might not work for you. So just take whatever you can, incorporate as much as you can, but don't try and feel overwhelmed by the fact that there is so much information and not everything is necessarily relevant to you and the people you sell to. So just take things with a pinch of salt. And often you can just verify with other colleagues or individuals within the SDR world or the AE world, and just say, hey, look, I've read this advice, keen to get your thoughts. And you can always just cross-reference and see what people's thoughts are. And more often than not, you'll probably build up a bank of individuals that you trust and think that are posting great content consistently. But yeah, I'd say just don't believe everything you read, because it's not always the right advice.
Yeah, great. I think one thing I'll always do is I'll always like click on that content person's profile and check they even have relevant experience in this field. Who are they selling to? Again, not saying experience means that they're great, but it's like, what background have they got? Are they an expert in this area, or do they have experience? Even is always important. Like 2 more questions, I guess, coming on to like the kind of focus on prospecting. what is it that you do that you think, might be better than other people? Or is it different? Like, from a personalization perspective, I assume, there's no magic formulas, sequencing, email, cold calling, LinkedIn. What do you try and do when you prospect? I'm assuming you're not just like trying to get as much activity out. Is there a couple of things that you do to help personalize?
Yeah, personalization is a big topic. I think there's always this like personalization versus relevance, and it's a big topic because personalization is good and it does help, and I don't disagree with the fact that it helps. But I also believe that spending too much time and over personalizing can also lead to inability to scale effectively what you're trying to achieve. So, I mean, my biggest thing is phone first. Don't hide behind your email. No one's ever gonna like. The quickest way to a meeting is getting a real life conversation on the phone with someone, and there's nothing more personal than a phone call, in my eyes, because it's the only way to have a real genuine conversation, to really understand what they're trying to achieve, what their problems might be, and ultimately decide whether or not you can help them. I think when it comes to personalization, I think relevance is so important, because if you can be relevant and slightly personal, you're much more likely to get some interest, a bite, versus just being straight out personalized, and having no relevance to the problems they might be facing. Because I could write a fantastic email telling you how you and I both share a mutual connection that went to a different university to both of us, but we share a mutual connection on LinkedIn. And you'd go, great, well, what's the relevance to that? And how's that going to help me solve a problem? It just doesn't work. So I think there's relevance in terms of the problems you solve and the problems they might be facing. With a light dusting of personalization, it certainly helps. Don't get me wrong, there are also those that go completely other side of the spectrum and personalize to a massive extent, and are very, very good at it. I fall somewhere in the middle. I'm not necessarily as good at writing a poem or personalizing to the absolute max. I think I personalize to an extent with relevance, but ultimately my sort of phone first mentality is the quickest way to a meeting. And again, I say there's nothing more personal than a phone call.
No, agree. Yeah. You cannot be a phone call, because no two phone calls will probably ever be the same, where two emails probably can be, will be probably for sure. Yeah, and I agree. I think it's like you can maybe send 5 hyper personalized messages or emails per day, which are perfect, right? 10 out of 10. But they may be going to people who just never respond to an email, or never respond to an email, or whatever. So it's getting that balance where, ultimately is sales is a numbers game to an extent. There's no one's ever going to deny that. So cool. Final question, Alex. Appreciate everything you've said today. And I guess just summing up, your journey, you've gone through, there's going to be a lot of people who are, brand new into the SDR role. You've kind of got like 3 years of, placement plus Threat Connect. You've probably done some good things. You've probably made a ton of mistakes as well along that journey. What would you go back and like, okay, right, if I went back to day one, is there something you'd do different, that you'd give advice to on SDRs, or even just like that piece of advice that you think going to be critical to them throughout their journey?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd necessarily say I'd do anything differently. I think everything is, yeah, as you say, I made mistakes and I made lots of mistakes, and that's the quickest way to learn, I think. I think what I'd give in terms of advice would be, don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's natural. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It's not a sense of like damaging your pride. Be proud to ask for help, because you're starting out, you're trying to work out what you're doing and trying to work out how to do things. Listen to your calls, or like just listen to calls. It's the quickest way to learn. You'll learn from the best in the team. You'll learn from yourself. If you listen to your own calls every day, you'll probably realize that you say and a lot of other things that you probably didn't realize you say a lot more than you think. And consistency is my last one. I think just be consistent, whether that be doing your phone calls, doing your emails, prospecting consistently listening to your calls, consistently trying to read up on your industry, your subject area, to find out more about what you do and the industry you're working in, or the problems you solve for your prospects. And yeah, last one would probably just be kind. It's the last one. I think there's no reason for anyone to not be kind. The SDR role is hard. So yeah, that's my last one probably.
Nice. Yeah, I think those are all brilliant points. I think I've gone through a journey of sales, from SDR to leadership to running teams, and I think those points around Yeah, consistency is the number one. And for me, it's like, you know, if you can be consistent on those kind of days where you're not motivated as much, those days, I've seen it with the highest performing salespeople. They are consistent with building pipeline, with their deal qualification, with their messaging, with their personalization. It's key. So yeah, absolutely love that. And then, yeah, make mistakes. I think if you're working in a good environment, people encourage that, right? And asking questions, especially beginning your journey. People are looking to help you, right? And it's a great time to ask questions because everyone knows you don't know the answers. So yeah, super cool. Alex, thank you so much. Really enjoyed that chat. I think everyone's going to enjoy listening to that. So appreciate it, and hopefully speak to you soon.
Thank you very much. Cheers.